I think that prohibition of drugs is the most immoral program that the United States has ever engaged in.
I just like to, smoke a joint every now and then.
Good people don't smoke marijuana.
You dick!
Welcome to VoteProPot-Cast, brought to you by VoteProPot.com.
Welcome to VoteProPot-Cast. This is episode 3. I'm Phil Adams.
I'm Jay Britton. I'm Andrew McCready's.
And that clip you heard is the voice of the late Milton Friedman, a Nobel Prize-winning economist and something of a conservative guru. We start out with Friedman to set up today's discussion, the first of several we'll be doing on the economic and political principles involved with cannabis legal reform. Now, as it happens, Andrew, Jay, and I all occupy rather different places on the political spectrum. Andrew, you tend to be more of a liberal.
Independent, extreme moderate that leans far forward.
Jay, you're more of a libertarian persuasion. I happen to be the resident conservative on the panel. Of course, in today's environment, those words liberal and conservative don't really mean quite what they once meant, but for our purposes, we'll stick with those designations. But in today's discussion, we'll be presenting the free market argument in favor of legalization. Andrew, you've been active for some time in cannabis legal reform advocacy. In fact, Vote Pro Pot is really your brainchild. Would you agree that in general, the natural base of support for legalization comes primarily from the left?
Traditionally, it has.
Okay.
But you're seeing that change.
Okay. So it's for many years it has been the liberal side, but more folks on the right are beginning to see the light, so to speak?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, Nixon properly identified the liberals and the Democrats as being pro-cannabis back in the 70s.
Okay, and he wasn't entirely wrong about that.
No.
But
among other things.
But last week or recently in the primary elections just passed, there were quite a few gubernatorial candidates who won their primaries that are pro-pot.
Okay, so it's definitely getting some traction.
And you're getting a pretty significant push towards legalizing hemp on the Republican side.
Mm-hmm. But I think as far as the broader spectrum of legalization, I would think that it's really the folks on my side of the aisle that really need the most convincing.
I would agree with that. Yeah, that's true.
So I want to speak directly to my fellow conservatives using the language of conservatism. What we intend to demonstrate today is that complete legalization of cannabis, not just for medicinal use, but for personal use as well, is the only real course that embodies and adheres to conservative principles of individual liberty, limited government, rule of law, and free market capitalism that we conservatives believe in. This quote-unquote war on drugs that the government has been waging these past several decades is the most egregious example yet of the damage that government does when it interferes with the normal workings of free market capitalism. So I want to just pose this kind of rhetorical question, meaning I know the answer. Our first episode, we talked a lot about, and Jay, you gave us the basic overall history of how cannabis came to become illegal. What I want to know is, why is cannabis illegal in 2018? Why is it still illegal? And the answer is because the government has decided it's not good for you. I mean, am I right about that?
Absolutely.
Is there any other reason I mean, when you boil down the, Schedule 1 business, the potential for abuse, gateway drugs, all that nonsense, what does it come down to? It comes down to the government has decided for you that this is not good for you. Am I right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Like so many other things.
Well, that's what they say.
That's what they say. Well, now,
But the reason they made it illegal wasn't because it's unhealthy.
it was because why?
Well, because of the economic reasons.
Right. So economic reasons is
Primarily in the hemp industry.
so there's two real falsehoods here. The falsehood that it's not good for you, well, more than that, it's more complicated. We know that in most cases that's not at all true.
It's not at all dangerous.
It's not a dangerous drug. Number two, the government is deciding for us what's good for us and what isn't. When did they get that mandate? And number three, that's not even the reason.
Right.
It's the economics of it. So let's talk about the economics. Okay? When you're talking about free market capitalism, and I know there are a lot of people who are listening who are not all on board with free market capitalism, and that's fine. What I want to do here is, even if you're not, and you're encountering folks in a discussion or debate about legalization with folks on the conservative side of the aisle, you'll have some ammunition to speak to them in the language they understand about why, not just from an economic standpoint, but from a moral standpoint. We'll start with the economics, about why it's such a bad idea to make it illegal. So let's start with free market economics. Capitalism, when you're talking about free market capitalism, you're talking about individual choice. It's a system that's built basically on trade, which means individual liberty and voluntary trade. So let's even go back a step further. What is economics? Economics is the means and methods that societies use to manage the allocation of its limited resources in order to meet the needs and wants of its members. So when we're talking about allocation of resources, that is an exercise in decision-making. And economic systems, whether it's a socialist system, a free market capitalist system, whatever it is, the difference between them is who is empowered to make those decisions about allocating resources and the means and methods of distribution and allocation of resources. There's really only two mechanisms available, and one of my favorite authors and speakers on that is the man we just heard, Milton Friedman,
Who was a libertarian, by the way.
who is very libertarian, but and for economics, you would call him more of a free market capitalist conservative.
Absolutely, yeah, right.
He says there's really only two mechanisms available as far as allocation of limited resources. There's the command mechanism, and there is the market mechanism. So it breaks down kind of like this. The command mechanism is a top-down method. Its decisions flow, the decision-making flows from the top down and from the few to the many. Example, the military. A general issues an order to his colonels. The colonels pass that order along to their majors and captains, and so on down the chain of command until it gets to the soldiers in the field who carry out the orders. It's an efficient method, but it's from the top down, and it's a good situation whenever the need is for decisive action and uniformity of execution. What makes it work is obedience.
That's why the military works so well.
That's right, the military. You need to know that your orders are going to be obeyed.
It's one of the few things that does work well in the government, and that's why.
That's why. And, military, police force,
Same thing. Same concept.
any kind of
with structure and with
structure and defense and that sort of thing. But you need to know that those orders are being complied with and obeyed. Otherwise,
it's chaos.
The structure breaks down and the mechanism isn't effective.
Right.
On the other hand, there's the market mechanism, in which decisions flow from the bottom up and from the many to the few. example, a retail store. Customers come in, they make purchasing decisions, and those decisions are carried out first at the retail level and then up the chain to the distribution level, eventually up to the corporate level and the boardroom level, where the methods and the resources are managed in order to meet customer demand. So it's very much from the bottom up and from the many to the few. What makes that work is not obedience, it's choice. As long as people know that they have a choice of to buy this or that or not to buy at all, then they know that going up the chain of command, the structure needs to address that choice. If there is no choice, then by definition, it reverts to a command structure. People do things because they have to do things.
Okay, and how does this relate to today's cannabis situation and the illegality?
Well, very simply because the decision to use cannabis products is a choice that, American citizens ought to be able to make. It's a choice we should have.
I saw an interview with Milton Friedman about this subject, and one of the things he stressed was, the government should not be involved, and this is something libertarians believe, in anything that doesn't affect someone else, hurt someone else, or have an impact on someone else's life. In other words, if this is something I choose to do, if I choose to shoot heroin into my veins and kill myself, and I'm not hurting anyone else, why is the government involved?
Well, that's exactly right.
That's the pure libertarian mindset. Now, that a lot of people would say, well, you're hurting the family, but that's not the government's decision to make.
That's right. But what Friedman goes on to say is that the government's decision to make it illegal brings about all of these social chaos that does result in people getting hurt.
Exactly.
Children and innocent victims, being taken down in drive-by shootings because of gang wars and turf wars because of drugs.
Yeah, it's one of the things he said is one of the great mistakes is to judge policies and programs by the intentions rather than the results. And that's really where so many politicians come in, because it helps them get elected when they say, oh, I want to save the children, or I want to, when the reality is when many of these policies are implemented, they do the exact opposite of what the plan was.
Exactly.
And that's the government. I mean, in so many ways, And he also said if you put the government in charge of the Sahara Desert, within 5 years, there'd be a shortage of sand. And that kind of, that's one of Friedman's quotes from somewhere I saw. And that kind of sums it up. You always seem to get, I shouldn't say always, so often the results are completely opposite from the intent when it comes to politics and when it comes to policy. And that's been the case with cannabis. Like you just said, and drugs in general. You make them illegal and think you're going to save people from themselves. And what you do is the complete opposite. You create a lot of problems.
Right. And the cure ends up being worse than the disease.
Exactly.
Bad things happen when government interferes with the market. That is, when they interfere with individual choice. Let me give you a few examples in our recent history. For example, when and this is, again, speaking the language of conservatives. When governments raise taxes, it doesn't mean they're going to raise more money in tax revenues or make incomes more equitable. All it means is that those who can afford to will find other non-taxable forms of income and other ways to avoid paying higher rates, while the ones who can't will suffer. Economic activity slows down, people lose their jobs, the government ends up with less tax revenue than they would have had if they'd have just kept things the way they were. So predictable, you could practically set your watch to it. Another example. Back in the 1990s, the government decided they wanted to expand the American dream of home ownership. So they passed laws that require that mortgage lenders ignore the normal market standards and practices that used to assess credit risk so that more people could buy homes. All they ended up doing was saddling millions of Americans with home mortgages that they couldn't afford and would ultimately default on, and inundating the securities market with billions of dollars of worthless paper. 10, 12 years down the line, the housing bubble bursts. The financial sector collapses, and we find ourselves in the midst of a great recession, all because the government couldn't leave well enough alone. And of course, the most striking example of this is alcohol prohibition back in the 20s and 30s. Did it stop anyone from drinking alcohol? Of course not. It just chased them all underground.
Actually, drinking increased during Prohibition.
Yeah. But not only did the drinking increase, but it created a whole new class of violent criminals that we're still dealing with today. Does that sound familiar? Why? Because the government back then decided that drinking alcohol was immoral. Now they're telling us that taking drugs, especially cannabis, isn't good for you.
Taking some drugs.
That's right.
Not all drugs.
Well, not all drugs, just the
illegal
drugs
ones.
that they can't make money on.
So who does the current law benefit?
That's a great question. Who does the current law benefit? It benefits the cartels.
Right.
The very people they wish they could stop. How does it benefit the cartels?
Just the way Prohibition benefited
Al Capone.
Al Capone.
That's right. And the mob. How does it do that? First of all, it makes it nearly impossible for anybody else to get into the market. Now, when you take any other agricultural product, beans, potatoes, beef, whatever it is, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of providers and suppliers importing goods into the United States. And
Competition.
It's competition. You've got a free market. The government steps in, makes it illegal, upsets the free market. So now only the richest and most powerful organizations, i.e. the cartels, can afford to get into the business and stay into the business.
And take the risk.
And take the risk. And they eliminate, they've got the planes, they've got the avenues, they've got the people, they've got the workforce, and everybody else gets pushed out of the market. Not only that, but the fact that marijuana is a fairly bulky drug, fairly easy for government to interdict, the next move is to not only grow marijuana or cannabis that's more potent, but to provide other drugs, crack cocaine, heroin, opioids, that are harder to interdict and give you more high for the buck.
And also another thing that's happened over the last 20 years where concentrates and extracts have really become popular.
That's right, because they're more potent.
Right, hash, shatter, oils, all that.
Right. And what has happened to the price? It goes up, 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 because there's only a few providers. So you've got.
Well, they can set the price anywhere they want.
They can set it anywhere they want. So you've got. So the government has made it easy for just a few people to get in the business, no competition. The price goes up. I ask you, what more could a monopolist want?
Well, what happened with alcohol prohibition was you notice all the bootleggers were selling liquor. They weren't making beer.
No.
Or not many of them were, because the profit per volume was greater with alcohol. Same thing with drugs. These drug smugglers figured out they could make a lot more money per smuggle run with cocaine and heroin or concentrate or hashish. So pot really was not the most popular drug to smuggle.
But it was in demand.
Right.
It's in demand, but that's why everyone started growing it locally.
Right.
And now the best pot in the world comes from the United States.
From the United States. Because
and now they're actually smuggling American weed into Mexico.
Yeah, I've heard.
Isn't that funny? I remember a time when you had to get your weed from Mexico.
Well, there's a booming middle class in Mexico.
Yeah.
And the Mexican brickweed, which was we're just crappy,
Yeah, dirt weed.
ditch weed practically, it doesn't have any value anymore. People don't.
Nobody wants that.
Nobody wants it. The only people that smoke it are the American tourists in Mexico because that's all they can get.
Right. Right.
And the middle class Mexicans are all starting to grow their own hydroponic or high end or high quality or medical grade cannabis, or they're smuggling it in from the United States.
Yeah. And now here's another issue that's, and I think it's California that's facing this problem, is that they've made it legal, but they're talking about imposing like a 35% tax on it. So
California.
So, they want to tax the hell out of it. What does that do? Well, that just sends it back underground.
Yeah. There you
Because the people who really want, they'll sell it on the black market, make more profit, and not pay taxes on it.
Well, in Colorado, if you have a medical permit, you don't have to pay the exorbitant tax.
What is the tax? Does anybody know in Colorado? I don't even know. I have to look that up.
I want to
Well, it's probably no 35%.
Yeah,
I think it's in 20. It might be in the high teens or 20s. But,
now, I could have my numbers wrong on that.
but if
so
it's
don't quote me.
medical, it's just the regular sales tax, I believe.
Right. But so here we have the government, on the one hand, telling us that we shouldn't be doing these drugs because they're not good for you. And on the other hand, single-handedly creating and perpetuating this huge drug crisis, this huge social crisis. They deny citizens really the pursuit of happiness, if you want to get down to it, for no good reason. They're assuming a caretaker role to tell us what we should and shouldn't be doing, to protect us from ourselves. There's no constitutional mandate for them to do that. Where is that in the Constitution that the government's job is to tell us what's good for us? They're turning otherwise law-abiding citizens into criminals, it's the line from, The Shawshank Redemption, one of my favorite movies, where he said, on the outside, I was a straight shooter. I had to come into prison to learn how to be a criminal. and that's so true in so many ways. And they've created these criminal cartels and manufactured a crisis of law enforcement that has become so unwieldy. And is so, that's the moral question. It's really, the economics just kind of describes and explains why it got to this place. But the problem is not just an economic problem. It's a moral problem. It's a moral problem that happens when the government steps in. And let me just give you this quote by the author C.S. Lewis. He says, quote, "Of all the tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep, his cupidity may at some point be satiated, but those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience." I think he's exactly right. It is not the government's job to be our nannies, to be our moms and dads. We're grown-ups. We're not children. We're not animals. We can make these decisions for ourselves.
And one of the things that Milton Friedman said was that most of the harm that comes from drugs is because they're illegal, which sums up what you said in the last few minutes.
You can't have regulation with prohibition.
Right.
And that's what we need to do on many reasons. One that I think is very important is the new cannabis industry in the United States. They're testing everything before it goes to market. So, if it's loaded with pesticides or fertilizers or chemicals or a bug infestation or mold, and I'm convinced probably throughout the years there's been some tainted weed distributed all throughout the United States.
We all remember Paraquat.
Yeah.
Some people can make an argument for, I wouldn't personally because of my politics and my beliefs, but I can almost understand people making an argument for, having heroin illegal or cocaine or so it's much more dangerous situations. But cannabis, it's crazy. I mean, nobody who believes it's harmful or who has believed in the last 30, 40 years that it's harmful.
It's a plant.
It's a plant. I mean,
I'm sure when they start doing studies, they're going to find something that isn't a positive effect of it. But there are no major things like alcohol or tobacco or cocaine.
Right.
So conservatives consider these ideas, and liberals, now you have some ammunition. And now for the cannabis news.
A study just came out of Colorado that says that they've studied the teen use since legalization. And it turns out that teen use has remained constant, if not gone down a little bit. So anyone who said they didn't want to legalize because it's going to hurt the children.
Yeah, where did that go?
Well, it's bullshit. But the same study also said that people over the age of 65, cannabis use has gone up over 300%.
Why, those old sons of bitches?
Well, they're using cannabis in place of other medications, and some
dudes.
seniors are having great results.
Such as
I saw an interview with a gentleman. He was in his 90s, and they had him on painkillers and these opioids, and he said I was walking around like a zombie. I would just stare out the window all day. And he switched over to cannabis, and he goes, man, now I'm up, I'm moving around, I eat, I sleep better, I'm talking to everybody.
TV's funnier.
Food tastes better.
Food tastes better. And you don't have to have your house burned down to experience
That's
that.
right.
I think maybe now we should mention that Phil's house burned down last week.
It's all right.
Why are we
Everyone's
laughing
all right.
about that, dude?
Because everybody is okay. That's why.
Because he lived through it.
This is not a joke. His house literally burnt down a week ago.
Well, yeah, it did.
Yeah. Well, anyway. Okay, I've got a news story here. The 30th state has passed a broad medical marijuana law, and that is one of the redder states, Oklahoma.
Yeah, look at
Oklahoma. Yeehaw.
Bullshit.
Why are you saying that?
Oh, they're going to pass some shitty law that says you have to have a certain type of oil, and only if you have 1 foot in the grave.
Yeah, or if you're dying of cancer.
We'll establish that in 5 years.
Well, so how do we look at that, Andrew? Is that the foot in the door, or is that the wrong kind of legislation? Because just because they're passing marijuana or cannabis legislation doesn't mean it's good legislation.
That's right.
Well, I think it's kind of a little bit of both. It's good to get our foot in the door, but then again, I wouldn't personally vote for bad legislation, even if it was for reform.
Well, I think I wouldn't either. I mean, you want to hold out for the right reform.
Correct.
Well, this passed overwhelmingly. It was an initiative, and it passed by like 55 or 60%. So
Wow.
it was. I mean, the public is ready.
Yeah, but what happens? The public get together, they do this ballot initiatives, and then the politicians come up and they pass
Shit laws
that it makes it.
Yeah.
You might as well not have
years
bothered.
before a half-assed system comes up.
Right.
Right. And speaking of which, here this story is out of Los Angeles. And the story is that the L.A. will kick off the process finally for licensing marijuana cultivators and manufacturers on August 1st of this year. But it's likely to be many months before any of those companies open their doors for business. And this is also speaks to what you're saying. Now, I guess it's good that things are moving along in L.A., but when did L.A. pass how long has it been since they passed legalization? 2016, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Now it's 2 years later, and they're finally getting around to licensing cultivators. What's
been about a year.
Has it been a year?
Well, the problem in California is that there's already so many people already growing under the old rules. So now each municipality is changing things, and all of a sudden they're coming up going, yeah, you can have dispensaries or grow operations, but only under these conditions in these zones. And so many established businesses are not up to code. So they're closing all these people down.
Regulations.
Right.
And
the government's stepping in and telling us how we can do things.
Right.
Yeah,
and they're giving
growing a plant.
and they're giving the permits to the people they want. Now, that's a problem. There's people out there who have been campaigning to reform cannabis laws for years.
But they don't have $1 billion, right?
They're not connected.
So when it comes time to get a permit, it's going to the guy who has been kicking down doors and arresting people for years. So many sheriffs and ex-law enforcement. It's not that there's anything wrong with that. More power to them. But I think there should be more opportunity for smaller businesses. And if you in some states, I don't know if you prove that you were working towards reform, maybe, I don't know if it should give you a benefit or at least give you a little bit more consideration when
that's a good
when
point.
approving licenses.
Yeah, and so many of the people getting these permits, and we're looking, we're in the Washington, D.C. area. Andrew and Phil both live in Maryland, and Maryland is legal now. And you were part of the permitting process, weren't you? You saw what happened. It's a bunch of rich folks whoever had the most money, right?
Yes. No poor person got a permit.
It's political patronage, and
like everything else.
And you want to think that that's not true, but we know that it is.
And it was mostly white, and it was mostly men.
Yeah. Well, that wraps up our third episode of VoteProPot-Cast. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you reach out to us. Send us an email at votepropot@gmail.com.
Please like and follow us on Facebook.com/VoteProPot.
Or check us out at VoteProPot.com.
Check out our next episode when we talk about Colorado and how legalization has worked out for them. 4 years later, where's it now?
Wish I was up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Sensimilla at the beginning of the day. But here I am in New York City, hiding out in Central Park, getting kidnapped by the police today sometime before dark. But I wish I was up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Sensimilla at the beginning of the day. The judge looked down upon me and frowned. He said, kid, get on your way. Just don't start out your morning with espresso and a J. I said, I wish I was up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Sensimilla at the beginning of the day. Hitched on out to Portland, caught a ride up to BC, took the bus over to the neighborhood to have a bowl with my coffee. Now I'm up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Sensimilla at the beginning of the day. Smoking good old Sensimilla at the beginning of the day.